So, hello, and thank you very much for, first of all, for finding the Memorial Hall. It's one of the harder to find DocFest venues, but it's probably one of the most gorgeous. It's an absolutely beautiful venue, so do drink in the gorgeousness that is the Memorial Hall. And thank you for coming along for our session on online platforms for the arts. We have an incredible lineup of speakers here, people with a huge range of experience across the sector, both in arts and in broadcasting and media, and especially in digital. So what we're going to discuss today is one of the many trends within particularly public service media towards trying to find audiences online and moving away from just relying on broadcast as a primary means we have of reaching audiences and engaging them with the public service media and issues that we know and love. So the way we're going to structure this, we're going to give you lots of time to get involved with the conversation because I know it's an issue that many of us feel very passionately about. Each of the speakers is going to talk for about 10 minutes or so and show us some examples of the work that they're commissioning right now. I might follow up with a couple of questions if I think there's some very interesting points to bring out from the work that they're showing. And then once all four speakers have finished, we will open it up for all of us to dive in and to ask questions. So do please start making notes and thinking about the kind of things you might like to ask the four esteemed panellists here. So to start with, we have Pegah Farahmand, who has recently joined Channel 4 from Vice Media, and I might well be asking her some insights about what you've learnt about making that journey. And in particular, her focus at Channel 4 is on Random Acts, a really, really fantastic and exciting project that they're doing there to commission new work from artists and cross-disciplinary creatives all across the world, really. So, Pegah, away you go.
Maybe I'll start. I'll show a reel first. This is a sort of give you a flavour of the body of work that we've have on the platform so far, and then a few kind of teasing stuff we've got coming up. So I'll show that first.
Fantastic.
So, there you go. So as you can see from that, it's a collection. It's Random Acts is home to the world's most innovative and provocative short-form creative content. We commission and showcase short-form content from the world of visual arts, animation, dance, spoken word, or any sort of amalgamation of genres. We are partnership with Arts Council England, and the partnership with the Arts Council means that we have 5 different network centres set up around the country, one in each different region, and their initiative is to kind of source, find, and train and mentor young filmmaking talent, so from 16 to 24-year-olds. And so it's really a space to kind of not only find new talent, but also kind of give a space for well-established artists to kind of premiere their work. And the ecosystem is that it's sort of when it relaunches in the summer, it's primarily going to live online. It sort of lives online, and for the shorts to be shared and engaged with in the way that sort of digital does so well. And then the TV show, which is launching just after the website launch, is a sort of 30-minute TV show which kind of curates and collates the best of and investigates them further and gives them more context and kind of elevates them even more.
So they're online, they'll be sitting on the new All 4 platform, which is the new kind of consolidated VOD platform.
So within the All 4, what we're doing is, we're realising the way that people sort of engage with content like this is through social media. And so what we're doing is we're creating a bespoke Tumblr site, which not only is host to in the sort of the home or the shop window, if you like, but also another form of the way people sort of can share and engage with the work. So the main source will be on a Tumblr site, but then that's fed into the All 4 and sort of sits within the hub of the All 4 site. And then it's, got all the socials, so from Facebook, Vimeo, YouTube, and all that kind of stuff. So, yeah.
And so what do you find that really works for you? Because, it's a huge diversity of different styles, and some of those in there, I think particularly there's a clip from, Hug Me, I'm Scared, and a few of those which have genuinely gone huge.
Yeah.
What kinds of work are you seeing really breaking out and finding new audiences?
Yeah, for me, from my, in the past, it really differs, and that's the thing with online. Sometimes it's quite unpredictable. What videos, what styles go viral. Often we used to publish videos that we didn't think would do well at all, and all of a sudden they'd have like 6 million hits, and it was like, you know, things like the video of strangers who kiss for the first time, which was created as a sort of, just as a teaser for a jean company, and no one would have thought something like that would have done as well as it did. But I think it's work that is often quite visceral, and people can relate to, and you know, it can be work that's really provocative and really sort of thought-provoking, and they're the ones that people want to sort of share, I think, more than anything else. It's the ones that make people go, what the hell was that? Or, oh my God, that's really beautiful. Or, so really, it's like, it's, you know, what makes a good video is really subjective. And it's difficult to sort of, I don't think there's a hard and fast rule. I think it's really just, it can be from the content, it can be, you know, a subject that's really fascinating, or it can be just the fact that it looks amazing, or it's a film, you know, it's a technique, maybe it's a three-dimensional sort of video, or, you know, the animation is fascinating. But anyway, so I think
that's a really important point, that actually the kind of breakout successes that you sometimes get online are just unpredictable. I mean, with the best one in the world, nobody can kind of architect them. So how does that affect your commissioning strategy? Do you have to be very subjective in yourself and just go with your kind of gut instinct? Or do you have a sense of certain types of things that you want to explore? I
think it's a bit of both. I think it's trying to get a healthy balance of the two. I mean, it's overwhelming, the amount of content that's out there. I mean, if you think about it, I think something like 300 hours of content is uploaded just on YouTube every minute. So if you think of that in a year, it's something like 160 million or something. So that's just on YouTube. That's not even including all the other digital platforms there are out there.
Now, which is
Facebook, which is now one of the biggest ways that people are also sharing and interacting with video. And so it's you know, there's a real kind of cosmos of stuff out there, which not only makes it harder, I think, for artists and directors to get their voice heard. I mean, it's leveled out the playing fields a little bit. It means that, you know, it's totally democratized making video art and filmmaking, which is a great thing. But I think it's also, you know, you can feel quite lost as a filmmaker, and especially being on the other side of it as well. You know, it's almost you feel like what you have to do has to stand out. You have to work harder to stand out against the rest. And as a commissioner, it's equally as overwhelming, because you know, we're getting sort of like tons and tons of stuff to look at, and treatments and ideas and artists and people out there doing amazing stuff. So so it is, you know, it is gut instinct, and it's also just looking at sort of certain trends, at the kind of stuff that people might like looking at, or certain topics or subjects that might be trending at the time. So I think.
How important is talent? Because I mean, there's some, you know, very, very big names in there. People like FKA Twigs, you know, Risa Fans, David Shrigley's animations. How important is talent to building an audience in spaces like particularly Tumblr? I think it's very interesting that you're focusing on Tumblr as your main community, because Tumblr is known as being like the home of fandom. It's the home of where audiences really hang out and spend a lot of time curating and sharing things about stuff they love. So is talent key to commissioning or not?
I think the important thing to sort of talk about what we do with the talent is what we try and do with Random Acts, and certainly, you know, from a past experience as well, is giving you know, well-established talent a space to be more experimental and you know, do stuff that they might not necessarily get a chance to do elsewhere. I mean, I've come across so many directors that that are really, they have a big name for themselves, they're really successful, but often once they get into the more sort of film or commercial world, they their ideas are often kind of you know, they're told to kind of hone in their ideas rather than be more experimental. So what we try and do is we try and create a space where well-established artists can come and do that, and give them a platform, like Jake, and you know, giving birth to Jake Chapman, and you know, Twigs doing performance or whatever that is. Although, you know, Twigs is a very sort of is an anomaly because she's very experimental anyway. But you know, that's and it's that. But then it's also giving space to the younger, you know, more emerging artists as well to kind of. But marrying the two together, I think that we're not just about saying like, you know, oh, we just want sort of names on there, and we're not just about sort of breaking new talent, but I think we're trying to sort of create a space within that, you know, cosmos of video content, and say this is our kind of curated corner where people can come and just watch the, you know, just watch the work, rather than it being the platform that is, you know, documentaries about the work, or, you know, it's not really about that, because I think there's so many of those out there, and they all do that really well, and I don't think we need to play in that space. But what we do want to do, and what I think we do quite well, is being a space to just come and see the stuff and and share it and talk about it.
So you said you're 3.5 months now into your time at Channel 4, and how long did you spend at Vice before?
I was at Vice for 10 years.
Blimey, so you were very, very early on in the Vice journey.
Yeah.
When they were just a magazine, or when they were starting to go online a bit then?
Oh no, not at all. There was no such thing. I mean, one of the things I did when I was interning at the New York office, and one of the things I did there was I had to help put together this document, which was a pitch to be Vice TV. And at the time, I remember thinking, Vice TV. And my job was to go through all the archive and pick out stories that would make good documentaries. And so that's one of the things that I did, and it was really interesting to suddenly see them. I mean, it was serendipitous what you were saying with, how you kind of went from doing what you did as well. And at that time, 2007, 2008, there wasn't really a lot of online platforms out there, and it was a really sort of important time to be creating stuff for online, and people didn't think it was going to go anywhere, but then, within just a few years, it became what it was. And I think what's interesting about Vice is that, they made a name for themselves as an online platform, but now they're now going, okay, how can we reach even more people? We're going to have our own TV channel.
Yeah.
So it's, it's sort of similar to how TV broadcasters go online just to purely strengthen their, sort of widen their audience and reach the most amount of people, which is essentially what everyone wants to do.
Yeah.
Vice then went the other way around. So it's really, for me, it's not really about kind of one platform being stronger than the other, but how can you sort of work with both and, sort of harmonise them and play them each to their strengths as well. The shorts, like in that form, work really well online, but the TV show that is there to kind of, give them a little bit more context and, maybe dive deeper into them a little bit.
And culturally, how have you found, in terms of what you're there to do at Channel 4 and your role within Channel 4's broader arts remit, which of course is part of a much bigger public service remit that's down to the way it's owned by the government and supported and created way back when. How have you found that cultural shift moving from Vice, which, as you just explained, has very much made up its own rules online as it's gone along, to working in a place like Channel 4?
Well, I think it's been really interesting to take what I've learned and my experience in the online world and feeding that into the sort of multi-platform world of Channel 4. And I think there's, there's sort of strengths of each one, and it's basically bringing all the sort of my experience of knowing how to kind of work within the online world and audiences and what people are liking, but also come to a brand like Channel 4 and sort of understand the sort of differences in audience, which has been really interesting. And it's like reaching kind of because with online it's a lot more kind of global, and so you think of your audience as global. And so what's interesting about what's happening with Channel 4 is that as they mesh more into online, it is eventually going to become more of a global brand. Yeah. So that's been quite a sort of exciting place to be at.
Good.
For me.
Excellent. I might come back and pick up on some of those later on. But now we'll move over to Peter Maniura, who's going to talk about your work at Arts Online and Get Creative.
Yeah, great. I mean, there are two sections to what I want to talk about today. So there's BBC Arts Online, which is just a year old, and it's interesting in contrast to what Pegah's saying, that Arts Online has very specific parameters. So it's not primarily about creating new work. What it is about is amplifying and aggregating, first of all, BBC services, so radio, television and online. And it's a lot about working in partnership with other organisations to give platforms to their work. So that amplification thing is really important. I'll give you just a couple of examples, really recent examples, and by the way, do go on to bbc.co.uk/arts right now. Check it out, see what's happening. So, how do we work with broadcast? Well, it's really straightforward. If you take, for example, Nina Simone and Me, Laura Mvula's film The Week Before Last, fantastic film about Nina Simone. What you'll find if you look at Arts Online is a whole collection of material around that. So there's an article with links, and this is a really important thing I want to talk about. We use all the bits. The written word still works incredibly well online. Galleries and photographs, audio, archive. And that's why I choose the Nina Simone example, because as well as bits, extra material which didn't make their way into the full film, there's a whole range of stuff there linking across to other areas in the BBC. So if you want to go on a Nina Simone journey, and I sure do, that's a great place to be. Now we'll take Hay Festival, week before last. So that's a big partnership thing. It's a big thing for the BBC, across radio and television. Online, 11 full-length sessions on iPlayer, 83 short clips and extracts from 46 Hay sessions. So an incredible range from Stephen Fry, Sandy Toksvig, Tom Holland talking about de-radicalising Mohammed, controversial session, and Neil Gaiman, and John Ronson. I mean, that's a big range. Basically, people talking to each other, because that's what it is. It's kind of pretty retro stuff. It's straightforward coverage, not done by the BBC, but done by Hay, but streamed and curated by us. And it's very, very popular. When we launched a year ago, nobody knew that iPlayer would be interested in so much from Hay, or that so many people would come to it. More than 500,000 over 7 or 8 days. And the material on iPlayer often performs very well. Obviously, popular names help to drive it, but it does mean that people find less familiar content. And indeed, it's interesting how broad you can be with arts. So the Tom Holland piece I mentioned, is that arts? Is that history? Actually, when it's aggregated together, it's intelligent thought and content, and whether you label it arts or not doesn't really matter. So let's just have a quick look at a clip of what we've done in the last year. So, and that sort of neatly throws to Get Creative. So, if you like, Arts Online is in a sense what you'd sort of expect the BBC to do in terms of user journeys, opening up content, trying to open up archive, supporting partners and all the rest of it. Now, Get Creative, which we launched in February, you can find it on the site as well, and it's bbc.co.uk/Get Creative. A quite different thing. That's really about participation. So, for example, we know that 10 million people a week, 10 million, which is nearly a sixth of the population, are actively engaged in the arts or crafts in some way every week. Now, that bears no relationship to the people who watch or come to the arts either in broadcast or online. It's a much bigger figure. So we talk a lot about participation in online and so forth, but actually, how do we really start to make that shift? Well, Get Creative is just a toe hole, a toe in that particular water. So, and it's completely different because all the content and the stuff that Get Creative does is basically from partners, not from the BBC at all, although we help to pull things together and so on. And of course, the online bit of Get Creative is only part of a much bigger kind of real-world movement over a year to try and shine a spotlight on everyday creativity of all types. And it's very interesting because, first of all, it's hard work. To try and turn those big numbers and the partners that we work with, so for example, Voluntary Arts, wonderful partner, they aggregate, they're the main body that pulls together all this activity across the nation. They have 63,000 member organisations. That's absolutely enormous. Now, what's really interesting though is all you need to do to be a Get Creative champion on the site is click through to a link, sign up, and what do you sign up to? You say that you're an organisation with a website that promotes the arts, and you have to commit to badge one event in a year, just one, Get Creative. And you even get branding free, including the BBC logo. How good could that be? How times have changed. Now, so far, nearly 1,000 have signed up. Fantastic! Then there's the content issue. And that's where it gets challenging, because that's where you have to work really, really hard. Because most people, most organisations, small and large, are not really used to working in this way. And so that's why I say it's hard work, but in a really good way. So that, for example, something that's been huge in the last 2 weeks is something, their title, not ours, Knitted Knockers. It's women who make breasts for people who've had mastectomies. not the silicon ones that hurt, but they knit them. And they won an Epic Award, which is one of the Voluntary Arts Awards last week for kind of innovation and so on. It is a most extraordinary and wonderful story. It's not what we would call conventional arts. They have wonderful photographs. It's a great idea. They've got a great title. Now, the interesting thing about that, how do you get your audience? Because I know Matt's very interested in this. Well, it's such a good story. Of course, it was picked up by BBC News. And the minute that we get something on the BBC News or on the BBC homepage, the traffic goes like that. So you'll get 25,000 people in a few hours. That's what you have to do. But you have to work really, really hard to get those stories and to shine that spotlight on that work. But gradually we're discovering that now you begin to develop a language and a way of working together, and the stories, the ideas start to come. Now, what's the goal of all this? When I say participation, first of all, we're showing participation in the real world, really, not the virtuous people doing things. But over time, I think there becomes a really interesting dialogue between those real-world activities, vast numbers of organisations and people, and also the fault line or the link between amateur and professional, which is not something we talk about a lot. But this country is so rich in all those types of creativity. So as I say, it's just a toe in the water, but I think a really interesting one.
So there's a couple of things I'd like to dive into on that. The first is, you talked a bit about, in two ways, about moving from just kind of viewing arts to going deeper and looking at the kind of stuff you're describing around the Nina Simone doc, and then with Get Creative into participation. How deep do people really go online? We kind of live now in a world in which we tend to bounce from Twitter or Facebook on an app to look at a link and then dive back into the app again.
Yeah.
How are you doing at getting people to actually follow journeys down deeper into more engagement and then into participation?
Yeah, I think not many people go a long way, but your analytics will certainly tell you how you're doing with a linked set of stories over a period of time. So, you know, in terms of the big numbers, your tens of thousands, you'll find that the majority of people don't go much further. Then I think in terms of people clicking through to other parts of the BBC estate or elsewhere on the site, you're probably into hundreds most days, and it could even be handfuls. But what I think one can see over time is that sort of stickiness of people coming back as well. And certain stories and certain collections are really quite persistent in people continually returning to them over days and weeks and even months. So you start to get a sense of which subject areas and ways of presenting them start to garner deeper interest.
So is the BBC still a primary destination for some kinds of online audiences, do you think? Or are we now, is the BBC just part of a kind of plethora of publishers, along with places like the New York Times and Washpo and Vice and Huffington Post and BuzzFeed and everything? Are there still audiences that still feel like the BBC is their primary destination online, do you think? And if so, what kinds of audiences do you think still behave like that? Well,
I think it would be no surprise to say that the Heartline audience on broadcast maps pretty accurately to the Heartland audience online. Those are the same people, actually. How many of them are there? Million, 2 million?
Let's just how much, but what kinds of people are there?
So but I think that what breaks through that is stories and ideas.
Yeah.
So depending on what it is you're doing, that's why I reference Get Creative, you start to get a different type of person and a different type of engagement. I think that's for sure. What's interesting though is in terms of loyalty, because certainly we're only one of a plethora of destinations. The homepage is not yet dead. Yeah. That's kind of what's really surprising. People talk a lot about this whole idea. There is there's part of the audience that does use that. There'll be days on which your homepage traffic is still bigger than any individual story, although increasingly the big numbers are coming, of course, through people finding...
And maybe related to that, you mentioned, how important are events? It seems that one of the things that really works for broadcasters trying to build audiences across platforms is events. So how much of your strategy is around building on events like Hay and Edinburgh and stuff like that?
Yeah, events are important. I'm really fascinated, as I've said before, by the link between the real world and the online world. And it's a really powerful one. You know, G.K. Chesterton once said that all is real that is local. One of my favourite quotes, because that sense of being there and knowing that there's a big thing out there that you can be part of is really powerful. And what's interesting, say, with Hay this year, you know, we tend to find that numbers are high for us during the day at the kind of the hot spots, first thing in the morning, lunchtime, early evening, and drop away at weekends. Hey, absolutely the opposite. Big numbers came over that first weekend and came back over the final weekend. So that's interesting. So an event, the eventness of how audiences flow can start to define it. So I would say really important.
And are they kind of your peak moments during the year? Is it when you do those kinds of big, you know, multiple channel coverage of some of those big events that you really attract your kind of hardcore audience? Yeah. Everything between that is, as you're saying, kind of spikes that occasionally break out into other audiences.
Yeah, and there are ways in which, you know, I think that this, you can work on spikiness, because the notion of an event can be one in a real world, or it can be around a whole other bunch, a constellation of things. And occasionally, online itself, you know, online first is, I think, increasingly important, although probably still relatively rare in terms of where we can break through.
Okay, again, we might pick up on that now. We're going to hand over now to Anthony Lilley, who has a huge and very varied background in this area, but is currently interim head of the space. Anthony.
Thank you, Matt. So I am currently, amongst other things, interim chief exec and creative director of the space. For those of you who don't know, the Space is an independent company which is effectively a joint funded venture between the BBC and the Arts Council. It was piloted in 2012, in part alongside the festival around the Olympics, and then it was relaunched last year with a focus on digital art. I've been around for a little while since the end of this year, and have sort of overlapped with Ruth Mackenzie, who's now moved on to run the Hallam Festival. And part of my job has been to look at what's been working about the space and to help think about how that might be focused slightly differently over the next duration of the project. So I'm going to quickly, in about 4 slides, ping you through some of those things you just saw there. Some of these I was involved in exec producing, some of them I wasn't. I won't particularly talk about City of Drones. It's a space commission which was done with the Barbican, which is an explorable sort of virtual world. If you could ping through for me, please. I haven't got the clicker.
It's here.
Oh, I have got. This is the wrong slide deck, by the way. Thank you. I'm going to talk about that one. I've got a belief that goes back way since before I was involved in the space, and I think we've just heard 2 people talk about the similar notion, not a belief, a view, a theory, that there are effectively 3, there's a sort of spectrum of things you can do with interactive media and art. In fact, if interactive media ran a major brand, it's true when I was working on Doctor Who, it's true when I was working on operas at the ENO, it's true now, that you have something that the online networks allow you to do, which is about distributing existing content in new ways, whether it's on demand, whether it's live streams, whether it's to audiences who previously couldn't get it before. Distribute. There's a piece that's about deepening the engagement of the audience with existing work by adding interactivity to work, and I'm going to come back to that in a moment. And there's a piece about developing genuinely interactive, orientated experiences. So I've done everything from television through to PlayStation games, and they're all different and they're all interesting. But my heart is in the arts. I'm out of theatre originally, which lots of people don't know. So when the opportunity came up to get involved in the space for a little while, it was really fascinating. This was sort of the first thing that I got involved in exec producing. This has just happened. I don't know if you came across this. David Best, the artist who produces the temples at the Burning Man Festival, and Artichoke, who are legends of large-scale participatory arts in the formerly known as the real world, built a temple in Derry with the local community. It was an incredibly moving thing. We went to see it, took the children to see it. People came in, they sort of took ownership of this space. They wrote notes, mementos, they gave tributes to their loved ones who they'd lost, all sorts of rather moving things. And then David and his team ceremonially burned it, which is their kind of expression of what they've done at Burning Man for a very long time, over a decade. And so in conjunction with Artichoke, we commissioned Adam Clark, who is an artist who mostly works in Minecraft, to try and see what would happen if you created that experience in Minecraft. I'm not very interested in making videos about art particularly. It's interesting, it's very important, it's not of my area of great expertise, but I am interested in what is common about the experience of so-called real life and so-called virtual life. And I was deeply interested in this. So we had an immensely moving day on the Saturday in Derry when this happened, because during the course of the day, people really did go and populate the same temple in Minecraft and leave their mementos, including making YouTube videos, incredibly moving YouTube video by one woman who talked through the loss of her unborn child in an incredibly sort of moving way, exactly what we just shed tears about in real life in the field. And then we burned it, which is what you just saw in Minecraft. And a few hundred people, south of 1,000, were in Minecraft to watch it burn, and tens of thousands of people have watched the build video, etc. So I'm interested in how you can extend the core idea, and Templecraft was a way of doing that. So if I can click on, I've got the clicker again now, have I? The second thing I got involved with was Blast Theory's Karen, which is, you saw Karen. She's an extremely disturbing life coach. If you haven't encountered Karen, I would recommend it. She's an app for the iPhone and shortly for Android. She really insinuates herself into your life. She becomes a form of sort of personal drama with National Theatre Wales and Blast Theory. She becomes quite disconcerting, or she becomes interesting in all sorts of fascinating ways. So I was interested in exploring what happens on the edge between drama and apps and art. There isn't a category for art apps in the Apple iTunes store, which I think is interesting. But if there were, Karen would now have had about 10,000 people download her, about 20% of whom are actually engaging with her in rather a deep way, which may be small in broadcast, but is a fortnight sold out in the Crucible, is a full sold out run at the Donmar Warehouse. So one of the things I'll come back to is, how do you measure success? And what are you measuring against? I think it's interesting. We learnt a lot during the course of Blast Theory. It was brilliantly executive produced by Paul Ludger, who's here, I think, not in the room, I'm not sure, and amazingly well made by the guys at Blast Theory. I can't claim this, and this was commissioned before my time, but I have been a little involved in trying to help it amplify. You saw some of this. This is Kuterman's Mix the City, so lots of rather beautiful little videos that you could remix yourself from Kuterman. This has worked all over the world. It's worked in Israel, it's working in multiple territories. Interesting thing about this for us was that it's not just a destination site, coming back to some of Matt's points earlier. It's a rather beautiful thing, and a couple of 100,000 people have been to its .com, and 250,000 people have been to its YouTube, and tens of thousands of people have engaged with it. It's not just about people, but I'm giving you sort of reach of scale. And they're interacting, which is one form. They're making, which is another form, and some of them are just viewing. And there's nothing just about that. It's an equally valid thing to do. But it's fascinating that a piece of work like that can spread in that way. Co-funded with British Council. And then right now we have James Bridle doing Citizen X at the South Bank. South Bank commissioned James, who I, in fact, was delighted to have originally helped commission when I used to chair Lighthouse with Honor Harger in Brighton. And so James is on record as having said he realised he was an artist when he spent time at an arts organisation, i.e. Lighthouse in Brighton. And the Space commissioned James to make an online extension of this piece, Citizen X, which is about discovering your what he describes as your algorithmic citizenship. So you can download a browser extension for Chrome and Firefox, and I think Safari as well, yes, which will tell you where your browsing is in terms of geography. And you'll be very surprised that lots of it's in odd places like Georgia, where the human rights regime and the censorship regime may not be to your taste, or Azerbaijan, or anywhere else. And it's an artistic interpretation of getting us to understand and think more consciously about our online behaviours. So there's a bunch of commissions there through the space and executive producing jobs through the space, which sort of indicate where I think we're likely to be heading with the space, around an increasing body of work which is about distributing and capturing work and distributing it, but finding exciting, interesting new artists, finding organisations that haven't had that opportunity before. I've said on record a number of occasions, I have in fact executive produced large-scale screenings from opera companies. This is not what the space will do. It is not picking up the last unused rights from large-scale institutions. Let's find work that would not otherwise have that capacity in conjunction with the BBC, BBC4, or multiple distribution partners. And then extending work. Citizen X was a live-only installation, and we put the digital online installation behind it. Templecraft was a big bonfire, and we put the Minecraft piece behind it. And then the third piece, commissioning large-scale pieces of work, which are designed for interactive and designed for interaction. And to come to Matt's point about audiences and who we're aiming at, I think, and this is not the space speaking, I think there's an incredibly fertile territory between people who know what art is, they think, but don't engage with it technologically, and people who engage with technology but don't engage with art as much as they might. And in Arts Council terms, there's sort of two segments in the Arts Council segmentation where that is true. It's not about their age, it's about their behaviour, it's about their attention patterns, it's about what they do with their time. So what we're doing very much more with the space now is looking for where those audiences are and what they're already doing, not concentrating on our own real estate, not thinking it's just about a website, but it is actually about where those audiences are. At the moment, we have a really interesting experiment going with WeTransfer, where we're getting tens of thousands of referrals through a site that's about downloading stuff, where otherwise there'd be a picture of a rather beautiful drop of water or something. And that's interesting to us. We're getting a lot of stuff in YouTube. I'm about to commission a major piece of Tumblr work behind a major artist. And talking with some really big names about where their footprint online might be, but not starting principally from let's make a website. It's about the artist's intention and how you distribute that, deepen that, or develop that.
There's a couple of phrases I want to pick up on what you just said. There's a very lovely phrase when she said that one of your roles is to capture and release artworks, which makes you sound like a kind of ethical butterfly collector.
The start of every sports ceremony.
But it's interesting that you say the space is moving maybe from its earlier incarnation, which was very much about trying to create a destination, to actually going out to where people are, which I guess has mirrors in organisations like Art Angel and others who have very much said, what is the right space for this work and where does it exist?
Yeah.
I mean, you have a background in some of that work yourself, so how has that influenced the kind of strategy work that you're doing at the moment?
It does, of course, because that's background. I mean, the first time I spoke here was when I just delivered 4Docs, the platform for sort of short-form participatory documentary. And since I've got involved, in things at all sorts of scales, in television, cinema, opera, and those sorts of things. But I think it's finding where the behaviours are interesting, and interposing artness into those places, sort of maximising the number of units of art there are in that conversation. And I don't really mean, I mean sort of intention. I'm mildly obsessed with the fact that the network is about efficiency, and art is usually about friction.
In what way is it about efficiency?
I'm trying to work on something at the moment where a very well-known iconoclastic artist, who I won't announce till we sign the deal, I'd love him to curate what Amazon recommended instead of Amazon telling me that a bunch of other people like this. I'd quite like to know what, it's not this because Proust is dead, but I'd like to know what Terry Pratchett would have done actually. But so finding those places where you can be surprised and have made to feel something by art. One of the things I've done with the commissioning process at the space so far is to add questions about what is the audience supposed to feel and do as a result of the thing you did. Because I love awesome stuff that catches your attention. But I've made those, as you say. I've made things that have got millions of views on YouTube and done nothing for ticket sales, for instance, in an arts organisation. I made television programmes that have helped kids read. They're more fun and they're much more valuable for me. So I think it's finding those. And working with a wider range of organisations. I think one of the things the space has missed in the last period has been working with expertise in the arts sector and then bringing that into this environment.
That was going to be my follow-up question, which is the kind of works that you're doing at the space are quite, I would imagine, fragile and ephemeral relationships between talent, traditional arts organisations, surprising partners, and spaces which maybe none of those actors would actually own or have any kind of control over.
Yeah.
So what are they, if that's where the focus of the space is going, to these kinds of very specific partnerships around each work, what's the real challenges in getting them together? What's kind of hard for you at the moment with the space?
I think there's no one straight answer to that, because in a sense, if you're capturing and distributing an existing artwork, that can be seems relatively straightforward. And I would have said until I tried it that, you know, putting an opera in a cinema would be straightforward, and it's not.
Yeah.
You know, I did Terry Gilliam's Benvenuto Cellini at the ENO. It was not straightforward.
But was that because of Terry Gilliam?
No, actually, it was probably better because of Terry, because Terry didn't go, oh, no. He went, yeah, go and have a try. And then he went, no, didn't work, or that's great. So I think there's something about the kind of understanding that across that spectrum, it's not one size fits all. It's also about getting rid of the digital word from it. Digital does not matter in that way. It's just on both sides of the equation, so you can delete it.
I can tell that was Bill clapping.
That was Bill, yeah. I'm doing a talk later in the year entitled The Death of Digital. The client didn't want it, but they're going to have it. Not the space. There's data, which is interesting. What data does is interesting. I like that. And there's kind of the behaviours of users. There's interaction and what that brings. So at one end, the big sort of, what you might call landmark commissions will be much more about interaction and interactive storytelling things.
Maybe coming back to that point about users, how important is it for you that the space is identified? If people are coming to this work in very different contexts, you know, Minecraft, maybe physical spaces, maybe Tumblr, maybe all these different, you know, YouTube, all these different networks, how important is it that people actually realise it's from the space, as opposed to the fact that they're having that experience and coming across these surprising and kind of maybe, you know, potentially quite life-changing kind of moments, which is what art does when it's at its best. How important is it that the space gets kind of recognised as a brand behind it?
Well, one rather mundane way of explaining that, I suppose, is that all the measurements and KPIs of the space now are not about traffic to the space.org.
Yeah.
They're about behaviours that occur wherever they occur. So I'm not driving traffic to real estate in that way. The space.org will be about the sector, it will be about people participating with us, it already is. So we've just launched an artist in residence with Radio 2, for instance, and I had a lovely time deciding who that should be last week. And the traffic's coming to or from the BBC, and that's all fine. I'm much more interested in the traffic, in the activity being where the audience is.
Yeah.
So the space has kind of got to be more of an enabling brand. You sort of should know what's not the space more than you know what it is. In a way, I'm struggling as a creative to work out how to say no nicely to things. I think one of the great challenges of being a game in town of the size of the space and the word digital is that you sort of get inundated with everything digital. And so one of, I think, the really important jobs for whoever succeeds me in this role permanently, and for me in the meantime, is to make it clearer what a space project feels like, and to make it clearer what it won't feel like, because the word digital is not it, you know. And so, be constructively constrained, I think, is one way through that. You did it at Channel 4 with commissioning briefs, sort of how you find the story you're trying to tell, and then get people to tell it better than you ever imagined, bring you things you didn't know were what you wanted, but are resonant with what you want. And so, that's, I think, it's a long answer, but that's it's more to do with the feel of it, and less to do with whether it's got a logo on it and whether it clicks through to space.org.
I once heard a very, very talented kind of web designer called Matt Jones say that one of his favourite metaphors for designing for a fractured web in the way that you've just described is something somebody once said about the Coke bottle, when they said the Coke bottle was the best piece of design ever, because even when it's smashed in 100 pieces, you still know it's a Coke bottle because of its iconic curves and lines and things like that. And I think maybe that's what you're saying about the space. So even if you're coming across it as something that's been forwarded 50 times on Tumblr, you still should recognise the spaciness of it in some way.
Ideally, and also the way it's done. You know, so the space has a capacity building remit, that's right. It should help people who have potential here to get better, and I include myself in that, and you in that, and somebody who's never made a, quote, digital thing in that. So I think there's something about the care with which you do it, and the way and who you bring to bear on it, how you bring great people together, I think is really important. And that perhaps that's not a funding scheme. That's a kind of development organisation and a commissioning body that can help great people get together, which I think is frankly what it always had the potential to be. But I think that's the interesting gap for me, is in how you find that in this public service landscape around art and sort of what used to be known as art. Can we do it? Don't know. Going to have a damn good shot at it.
Okay, I want to come back to that art thing maybe at the end.
Yeah.
Alison, over to Alison Clark, who leads on combined arts for the Arts Council, who in many ways has been responsible for parts of all of the projects we've been discussing today.
Yeah, not me personally.
Go on, take credit.
So I just say we're not make work, we don't directly commission work, but we do support with and work with BBC, Channel 4, and lots of other partners to get work, to get more work made by more audiences, by more artists to more audiences, and that's why we do it. And I'm not going to talk much about the space or Random Acts because that's been done, but I do want to talk a little bit about how we support the arts through our various funding programmes. We have Grants for the Arts, which is our open access programme. National portfolio organisations, which are the arts organisations we fund on a 3-year basis, and that's everything from the largest galleries to the smallest participatory arts organisations, the Space, Random Acts. And then what I'll talk a little bit more about now is a relatively new venture which will be soft launched in the summer, which is a multi-channel network. So we've already heard quite a bit about the fact that there are lots of artists making work. There are lots of organisations creating content, some of which is great, some of which is not so great. But the ability to actually have it seen is where there's a gap in the market, if you like. So we've awarded £1.8 million of funding to work with Writester, which is one of the biggest players in this field, who are developing what's now called Canvas, which, as I said, will be soft launched in the summer. There's a website you can go to now, which is canvasonline.tv. And the thinking behind... Let me just get there. Yeah, so the thinking behind that is that this is a way that the arts sector and the arts sector really, really broadly can actually have its work in a curated space using YouTube, using all of the expertise and the professionalism of Writester, actually getting it to people. And as part of that, there's an element of monetizing content, so there's a way that the arts sector can start to make its online content a little bit more sustainable. The question is, of course, what's that content like? And there's been a kind of interesting theme so far, which I've heard from the panel, which is about the kind of intersection between real life and online. And one of the reasons we're interested in this whole field is that the Taking Part data, which is a survey done via DCMS, which has been going for 10 years or more, which is a 6-monthly survey which kind of checks where people see art, what they do, how they get their art, basically. And over the last couple of surveys, the two areas where there are spikes is both online and outdoors, so in festivals and in those kind of bespoke pop-up spaces we all like so much. And I think what that tells us is that audiences are interested in the bespoke, the unusual, the kind of experiencing something which you both self-curate in the way you experience it, and also is a thing which can't happen again. So that gives challenges around building-based, theatre companies, but it also it also helps the arts sector think much more porously about the way in which it shows work. And I think the way that online works as a space, in the way which outdoors does too, is that actually it's a space in its own right, and that's fine. It doesn't have to drive the audience to the theatre. It doesn't have to drive an audience to the opera. Actually, that space in its own right is often the right space, and I think that's something which we as funders need to really sort of work out what we mean by that. One of the new programmes we just launched this week, so last week now, which is called Ambition for Excellence, which does what it says on the tin, in theory. It's a kind of large-scale, long-term talent development programme. One of the aims of that is that there'll be a real upsurge in the way which art is both made and distributed online, and that will be one of the criteria we're actually looking for in this fund. So that's a thing we hope will actually change the way that work is made and the way that work is experienced over time. Now, I did have a bit of a clip to show you, but I'm actually not going to show it because it was just kind of showing you what I guess what Wrightster have told us work now, and it was a clip which I'm sure lots of you have seen, and you can look it up, which is the Tate's Obliterated Room, which is the film, and the artist's name has just escaped me, which is a plain white room over time filled with dots. And that's fantastic, and it's a really nice film. But if you look at the number of viewings, it's still, compared to a lot of online content, certainly compared to broadcast, it's in tiny figures. So the challenge still is how to get those sort of large numbers you're talking about onto the online space.
How are you? It's interesting what you said about the Tate and YouTube strategy. We did a piece of work for Museum of Modern Art in New York last year, and their most successful video online is Yoko Ono doing a screen performance at one of their things. And actually, when you look at it, the reason why people are sharing it is because they're saying this is bloody ridiculous. Because it's basically Yoko Ono screaming into a microphone for about 30 minutes, which a lot of people will really like, and some people, and it just got shared and went viral because people were just like, holy crap, this is ridiculous. So how important are numbers like that? I mean, what's the kind of, for you and particularly for Canvas, what is the goal there? Is it about reaching audiences, or is it about getting scale, and how are the two maybe slightly different things?
I think that it's similar to the point Peter makes, that there's this enormous unfulfilled potential out there, which is people being able to really have a great experience online, and it is about matching them up. So it is about numbers. Of course it is. We want to get more people seeing more art, but it's also it's about over time altering and improving the way which artists and organisations make work. So one of the things which I did a few years ago in the very, very early days of the space was actually take part in the process to pick the work which went in its first iteration, and the kind of work which, say, a visual arts gallery thought would work on the TV, online, compared to what people actually wanted to see, there was a huge distance. And even three or 4 years ago, I can remember being in a forum like this, and a fairly well-known gallery was saying that it didn't want to put its work online because it would then have no control over the way that people used it or viewed it. And that was only perhaps 3 years ago. So things have changed immensely since then, but there's a lot more change to happen.
Okay, we've got about half an hour left, so before we wrap up the audience at the end, I'd love some questions from you guys out there. So I think we have a couple of microphones around. Yep, we have one over there. So would anyone like to ask any questions of the panel about the work that they're doing right now? Yes, we have one guy over there with glasses and a beard. I'm quite aware at media events now saying somebody's wearing glasses and a beard is potentially, Hi, can you just say who you are as well? It's always nice to know who you are.
Sorry. This is on.
You're on.
David Oppenheim from the National Film Board in Toronto, Canada. Just a question on, I think you mentioned the metrics, the download numbers for Karen, and 10,000. And I sort of liked how you drew the comparison to a sold-out week at the Crucible, I believe, or something. And you said something you think we should talk more about in terms of how we evaluate these things. Can you expand a bit on that with Karen, or just any other examples you'd like?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think it's kind of easy to fall into a trap that assumes that everything online is trying to be television and therefore should be measured according to that. And when you come into this sort of arts area, and you just look at these kind of rather crude sort of how much did something cost per user sort of metrics, just about everything that you do in digital context, sort of interactive context, that gets anything like a sensible number will massively outperform in value for money terms everything you do live. Not everything, but many things. Opera, large-scale theatre, almost all of it, if you do it at all well. And so I just think it's sort of important to understand that brutal metric's not really all that helpful. So trying to dig under to things like, well, how long did they stay? What were their levels of interaction? As we get really good at this, what actually, what content came off them? How much did they share? What was their sort of experience of it? I have a hobby in large-scale data, and that's sort of in there is something really fascinating. So this sort of brutal it's like Barb ratings, or it's like audience attendance, but at least it's not only like Barb ratings, which is the point I was trying to make, really. I did interaction design on a show at the Donmar last year, a play by James Graham called Privacy. Incredible hit, sold out 40-something performances in a room that seats 290 people. I was also doing Gilliam at the ENO at the same time. That was 1 week. So it's sort of they're not comparable. So I think the thing to think about with something like Karen for us was a combination of, can you get a reasonably serious number of downloads? Can you get past the idea that's about television launch patterns? If we do Karen well, it will be still interesting in a little while. You know, paintings that have been around for a bit don't necessarily go off just because they've not been released recently. So there's sort of something interesting about when there's a moment where it's worth saying, you know, there's an app called Karen, or whatever it is. So there's something about that, finding the patterns of behaviours, and then there's something about how did it feel, what actually happened. You know, when I made PlayStation games, you're into large-scale metrics of every click and interaction, not just how many. And so I'm just making a case for sort of thinking slightly differently about how that is measured.
I actually read a very good blog post this morning of somebody talking about a talk that Tom Phillips from BuzzFeed UK did on a panel about how various online platforms have covered the general election. And he said at BuzzFeed they talk a lot about what would be good for this article, which I think is really interesting, because everyone looks at BuzzFeed and looks at the huge numbers, but it's interesting that internally they're having a conversation saying, well, what do we think this article is going to get, rather than which is biggest? Alison, you look like you were going to say something about that, or...
I suppose it was the thing about behaviours is I think is really linked to what Peter was talking about earlier about content, and you talked about Karen, which was also National Theatre of Wales, and of course they did that amazing Passion a couple of years ago, which was Michael Sheen, Pot Talbot being Jesus, but their online campaign linked to that was incredible, and the engagement actually was about the stories, and without wanting to sound, you know, sort of really, really old-fashioned, it does come back to stories often, but it's just, and those platforms are the different ways to, you know, sort of tell them and hear them. Yeah.
I have a company called Storythings, so I'd hardly agree. Pegah and Peter, I'm very interested about this metrics question for you two in particular, working in an organisation that still absolutely obsesses about overnights and about the kind of metrics that Anthony was talking about. I remember when I was commissioning at Channel 4 trying to explain to people the difference between the metrics we were getting and the metrics they were getting, and I remember somebody came up to me and said, yeah, but your metrics aren't really real, are you? And then I explained how Barb actually measures audiences, and you know, and the fact that we were actually seeing real hits on websites, and they were extrapolating from a panel of about 5,000 people, and the attitude changed. So
I think that might have, you know, I think also the trends for that might have even changed. Often, you know, you might not get a vast amount of viewers watching a programme, but it will be the most trending topic on Twitter, and so that is seen as much as a success as, say, viewings, as ratings on TV. But and I think it's the same with online. There's so many different ways you can measure success. It's, you know, is it the amount of hits on the website? Is it the amount of minutes they stay on the website? Is it how much of the, you know, how many sort of minutes of the video they're watching, like audience engagement? And certainly from my previous job, where, you know, at the beginning we thought everyone wants short form. It has to be like 3 minutes. You can't hold attention longer than 3 minutes. And actually, we found that our most successful stuff was actually the docs that were like roughly 15 minutes long. But what we realised is if something is good, then people will stay and watch it and they'll share it. And that's essentially at the heart and soul of all of that stuff. Is, you know, it can be, you can do all these different sort of, you know, marketing campaigns around something, but essentially if a piece of work, if a piece of content, if a film or a video, whatever it is good, then it speaks for itself. And I think that, you know, it's also really important to have relationships with other aggregator sites, like you're talking about, sort of Nowness and Dazed and This Is It. There's so many out there. And, you know, for us, especially with Random Acts, it's who can you partner up with to kind of strengthen, you know, those bonds and see, because there's such a kind of variety, such an eclectic mix of work that's on the site. You know, there's not kind of one partner that you can go to that sort of serves all of them. You might want to go to someone to kind of feed in the more like music orientated pieces, or the more fashion, or the more sort of filmmaking work. So I don't know if I've answered your question.
Yeah, no, it's good. I mean, particularly with some of the work that you're doing at Random Access, some of the partners that you were mentioning, like Days and others, one of the worries these days is that actually, the web is now becoming a series of relatively controlled ecosystems. That actually we're all playing not on open web, but on Facebook and on Google and on Twitter's turf. So how do you try and optimize? I mean, you talk about going directly to Tumblr. Do you think about the space you're commissioning for as being the web, or is it very specifically thinking about those platforms and those ecosystems?
No, I think at the sort of root of what we're doing is we're just we want to showcase the best stuff out there, and we want to be known as the sort of the strand that you can go to sort of experience all of this stuff. So I don't think. Do you mean, am I commissioning sort of specifically thinking about those partnerships?
Yeah.
No, I don't think so. I think it's more understanding what partners are going to be useful and are going to want the different types of content that we have. I think it's the other way around.
Great.
Yeah.
Cool. Okay, more questions. Yes, lady at the front. Just wait for the mic, because I know they record these sessions, and people watching online later might be unable to hear you. And please do introduce yourself first.
I'm Joyce Nichols. I'm working as a freelance documentary photographer and filmmaker. I'm really curious to sort of know, maybe I'm still stuck in the ages, but I've been really quite protective of where I've got an online website and I've published my stuff in various online things, but I've been really cautious about the whole Tumblr, Twitter world, because I'm worried it will perhaps, I don't know what the right word is, but people might not take the work as seriously or as professionally. And I was wondering, is that a silly attitude to have, and you should just go for it and let your film go around Vimeo, let it go around Tumblr? I
think I can answer a bit
Go
of
for
that.
it, yeah.
I mean, I don't think you should... every artist and every filmmaker can choose different ways for how they want to, promote their work. I think there's still this sort of weird stigma attached to things like Twitter and Facebook and Vimeo, and I think that's, often... I think that you shouldn't really see it as degrading to the sort of integrity of what you're doing. I think the most sort of powerful and compelling and really deep and meaningful work is accessed on all of those platforms. However, there's some people that just choose not to from an artistic point of view. It might be that you just don't want that to be the case, but it's really, I would say, I don't think you should see it as a negative to kind of be across all of those things. I think there is such thing as over self-promotion as well. But I think if you're you can curate where and who to go to depending on what sort of stuff you make, I think.
Is this still on?
Yeah.
Just out of interest as well, if I was interested in maybe sending my work to this new film thing, I can't remember
Canvas.
what you were talking about. If your work has already been kind of spread around Tumblr or Vimeo, whatever, would you not be interested because you want new content that hasn't been seen before, or would that be great because it already has an audience?
Well, the point of Canvas, and I'll just check with a colleague in the audience if this is right, is that it is curated. So it's partly it's about having the right content, but it's just about getting it out there. So it's fine if it's been seen before.
Okay. In actual fact, it might be something we come back to a bit at the end. Is that there is a very, the internet isn't a space that everyone experiences in exactly the same time. And it's kind of coming a bit to what Anthony was saying, that actually because it's been big on Vimeo, it doesn't necessarily mean that people on Facebook have seen it, or people on YouTube have seen it, or even many sub-communities that exist within those worlds. So I think one of this idea of actually what does launching a piece mean is really, really interesting right now, and maybe we can pick up on that later. We have a question at the front. Do you want to just say, have you got the microphone there? Do you want to just say who you are?
Yep. Thank you. Good evening. Thank you for the very expanding talk. I'm Angelo from the Panama Film Company. I have two questions, actually. One will be specifically for you. If you can explain me a little bit more, explain us a little bit more, that I could not understand very well how actually your company works. You showed this image, upload once, write busters, 1.5. How do actually this works? and slowly, because I have sometimes problem understanding the accent.
So is it more like the structure of their organisations or the
how,
structure of the
how
projects?
they actually work, yeah.
Well, let's do a very quick bit on that all the way along. We probably assumed a lot of people know.
For her.
Alison.
And then I have one for all of them.
Okay.
So was the question, how does Canvas work?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So it's it's still in the process of being worked out exactly how it will work. So it will be soft launched, as I say, in the summer. But the thinking behind it is that Wrightster will work with a number of arts organisations and others to get some of the best content out there. They will actually push it through their channels, YouTube mostly, and what will sort of wrap around it will be the ability to just make it be seen. So they will use all of the kind of techniques that they use in fashion and music and retail, which the arts have sort of shied away from so far. So that's broadly how it works.
Sounds like empowering content.
Yeah, yeah.
And your second
question was for all the panelists. I want to know, like, from the social engagement point of view, what has been the results or examples that you could provide us of works that have actually worked in the way that, how to explain this? Let's say that you're working with a community that have very difficulties, and you kind of help them with them, and they are working in social engagement projects with deal with social issues. How do you actually manage to take these videos or the content that you're producing together with them to generate a benefit to the community, not only creating awareness of their issues, but actually, like, I don't know, I have people that sometimes will come to work and at the end of the shooting they come, hey Angelo, do I have $1 so I can go home, So,
I mean, we started very much by talking about the root of all of your projects in, a traditional sense of public service media. So how important is it that there are these kinds of potentially social outputs? Those are really hard to measure intangibles about the fact that what you're doing isn't just art for art's sake, but actually something that makes a difference to the cultural life of the audiences.
Do you mean in terms of how, like, methods and way that we're engaging people? Sorry, is that what you mean?
I mean, very broadly, how, are your works specifically about that kind of social engagement that the questioner was asking about there, or is that a kind of side product of the work you're doing?
I think that there are, certainly there is a sort of collection of films within Random Acts that do hit on those subjects, but we don't go out and say we need to do a certain amount of films that kind of, tick those boxes. But naturally, artists use short form film for self-expression, to talk about issues in the wider world as well as themselves. So I think it's a kind of inherent part of the project in itself. And I think that that's something that kind of comes naturally within what we're doing, and it will go and hit the people that sort of, that sort of, they'll feel that sort of, they'll
because the works you're commissioning are coming
that.
From specific communities. It's almost kind of inherent that some
exactly.
of those
and it depends. All the different artists, they're just as much our biggest kind of marketers as all these other platforms. So they know who wants to see their film. They know all their fans and their followers and the sort of people that want to really listen to what they have to say and the kind of stuff that they want to make.
Yep, great. Peter, obviously with Get Creative there is a very specific task there to engage.
Yeah, well, okay, so very precisely, I mentioned that Get Creative has champions. So the first thing is that it's a space for people to say, hello, we're here, and also geographically, if you look in the northwest, Sheffield, whatever, you can find who's doing what in your area. And then something I'm hoping will be active in the next 2 weeks, even more specifically, will be an activity finder. So that's not something that the BBC will host. It'll be done with a partner, so you can find out what organisations are active. But then if you're interested in cross-stitch in Sheffield, for example, you'll be able to go to that and literally find out what's on where. And I don't mean paying shows in theatres, because that's a different thing. I mean about activities, exhibitions, and all the rest of it. So, and I think through that, we will have a chance to see how that kind of platform and those journeys actually benefit and what impact they might have on activity in specific communities and in specific arts forms or crafts.
Anthony, do you want to pick up on that?
Yeah. So I think one of the responsibilities of public money in this context, speaking briefly as a National Lottery Commissioner, which I am in my so-called spare time, is is that it's representative, that it isn't simply something that the dominant force in any given context, whether it's market or geography or ethnicity or anything else, is able to co-opt. So I think part of the deal is that everybody's part of the public, and so you have a responsibility. So I think that's, and I'm sure Arts Council would absolutely echo that, as with the BBC and Channel 4, in their kind of own distinct ways. But I'm not sure I know what art for art's sake is. I think art for art's sake is bad art, generally speaking. So I think, I'm closer to Ruskin in saying, you have nothing in your house that you do not know to be beautiful or know to be useful. I think art in this context is useful. It may be useful in a very long-term sort of way in changing people's perspectives or perceptions, but it isn't decorative.
So far we've had quotes from Ruskin and G.K. Chesterton to describe digital art in the 21st century, which is quite impressive.
I can do Aristotle if you really go for it.
That's far enough back. Alison, do you want to pick up on this question of the social value?
Well, clearly we're very, very interested in having a kind of properly represented set of both makers and audiences for the work we do. And one of the reasons we're really interested in the link between the online and the real world in terms of festivals, which is something which I think has a lot to offer, is that festivals are the one part of the work that we fund where the audience who attend directly match the audience in the place, the population in the place where it takes place, if you see what I mean, which in most art forms and in most arts buildings does not happen. So I think that's a very interesting fact to sort of take forward. I think there's and there is something clearly about younger audiences who are using who are sort of using YouTube channels, which is precisely why somebody like Wrightster we're using who have that link. We'd work with them, but but I don't think we should fall into the trap that if it's online, it's about youth, because it isn't.
No. I'll make one other point about that. So I think the other benefit, and this is true of Channel 4's remit in telly and parts of the BBC's remit, is your attitude to risk and change.
Yeah.
I think we at the space, the opportunity is there to explore areas which in economic terms are market failures. I don't really like that, but also for me are places where nobody's planted a flag yet. And that's a really interesting place to be, and that's a legitimate thing to do, both in terms of the companies or the commercial things it might create and the sort of countercultural and artistic interventions you might make. And that's something I think you can do in this context because it isn't taken over, but it doesn't mean you sort of flatten it and just end up with a bit of everything for everybody. I think the great commissioning challenge is finding beacons of stuff that will stand out. So when you look at Karen, or you look at Border Game, or in fact you were talking about Passion, that's National Theatre of Wales in that context. It's actually a bunch of people with John McGrath, who's about to be the artistic director of Manchester International Festival, who's a sort of spike, I think that's right. If that's not public news, it is now. It is it? Yeah. Good. Who has a way into this and to collaborate with other people, from other parts of the sector. And I think that's one of the key sort of responsibilities, that when we announce the Radio 2 Artist in Residence next week, it will not be what you think a Radio 2 Artist in Residence is. Yeah. That person will not be that.
To add to that as well, the sort of social responsibility side, I mean, that sort of runs through everything that we do through, at Channel 4, as same with BBC as well. And the partnership that we have with Arts Council is very much sort of kind of towards helping the younger people who might not have resources to filmmaking and creating art. So that's also a very sort of important partnership in terms of social responsibility as well. But again, it's the sort of content we put out there, sort of drip feeding these films on TV over the last few years, where people would be completely unexpected and sort of provoking some sort of reaction or inspiring people in a way that they weren't sort of expecting. I think that's a really important part of what we're doing.
Completely, particularly for Channel 4, I think, who of course was created in the first place in the 80s to do exactly that kind of work. Right. We've got time for one more question before we wrap up. We're going to have a mic again back down at the front. And again, please do say who you are. Introduce yourself.
Hi. Thanks for your talk. It's been really interesting. I was just wondering, because I'm a young filmmaker, so the medium that I usually use is sort of film and photography, and I also write quite a lot. But then I've started to have more ideas that I actually think would be way better suited to a more sort of like live experience. How do you sort of if you don't have any sort of like web design experience, how do you go about like writing an application that's going to sound convincing while also knowing that you don't actually know how to put like the so technical sides into place? Like, what sort of step should I be taking to try and like make some of those more interactive ideas of reality? Like, how would I go about that?
So maybe the question is not how do I fake it to get money, but how do you partnership and how do you get together? I mean, all of the projects you've been talking about involve a lot of collaboration and partnerships.
Yeah.
So what advice do you have for somebody wanting to start to work in this space to find those partnerships and find those collaborations? Maybe start, we'll go from the Arts Council down from that point.
I don't have the answer, and in some ways,
the organisations you fund have the answer. That's the point. Yes.
Yeah. So I mean, I in fact have more questions after this morning's session I had, which was actually looking at the interactive exhibition in the Millennium Gallery and the kind of virtual reality extravaganza at site. Was that is that it's actually made me as a funder have realised that we're still supporting with a mechanism which is about much more traditional ways of making art, and that actually as a funder we need to really, really understand more the kind of things you want to do in order to better support it.
Yeah.
But these guys have the answer.
And is that, just quickly, that's about less being maybe as organisational or artist-led that you have been in the past, and more about collaborations and partnerships?
I think it's about that, but it's also it's about recognising that that the hybrid and the collaborative and the blurring of boundaries is all about where people are, and actually as a public funder we still have boxes around those things.
Yeah. You still have dance, you still have visual art, all that kind of stuff.
But luckily we also have combined arts.
Which is me.
So
that means you're going to be the next director of the Arts Council, because it will all become that. Anthony?
Everything is miscellaneous then, though, isn't it? You don't know.
That would be your autobiography title.
Mine. I think there is a book called that already, actually, David Cameron. So I don't think it's about technology, primarily. No. I think I've seldom seen a bit of art that could only be done with technology that isn't designed to sell technology. So the VR stuff's all very interesting. I've worked in AR, I've worked in VR. It's all very interesting, but it's actually, is it narratives? Is it characters? That's where the stuff that works will be, because it will never look right. It might look real, but it will never be right. Mm-hmm. And so right will come from a feeling and a characterfulness and something that's to do with stories. So I think actually you need friends who can help you understand the bounds of the possible. Yeah. But I don't think you start there. I think you start with the response, the kind of behaviour, the feelings you're trying to trigger. Mm-hmm. And then you work at the lowest possible technological level to make that work. Yeah. And then if it won't work there, you work out where else. I've been describing, I don't know, the technologists in the room. I'm at the theatre background and a software background, which makes me kind of half lovey and half geek, which is nice. The current vogue in software development, is this thing called agile methodology, where every morning you meet and you talk about what you've done, and every 2 weeks you have a thing that you can show. That's what we used to do in theatres. Yeah. That's what you do in rehearsal. Every single day. You put a show on its feet, you stand up, you see if it's working, you make it better. And that's harder. Yeah. That's way harder than understanding how the tech works, because the people who know the tech will enjoy being with you. Mm-hmm. So find the middle of the idea and then find the text.
Peter, advice to somebody.
It is always about the story. It's about what you want to do and what you want to say, and it's about being curious. Yeah. Because, funny enough, from my background is in classical music and performance on that side, which is often the things that people don't understand and are not very interested in. That gives you an awful amount of agency, I've discovered. And moving into the online world a few years ago is rather similar. That's always very helpful, but it never absolves you from the need to be clear and rigorous with your own ideas, and particularly about who you want to reach. If you've got that sorted out and you've got some nice friends and you're curious, you'll be in a good place.
Good. Pegah?
Yeah, I agree sort of with what these guys are saying, and also it's interesting what you're talking about with technology, because a few years before I started Channel 4 I was doing Creators Project for a few years as well, and all the sort of more the installations or the pieces of work that we'd make, it was like, how could you use technology to make an experience more human? And that was always at the heart of what we're doing, so from storytelling to actually making something more human. But from a more practical sense, I would say probably trying to engage with other people, places, platforms, companies, whatever that is, who are doing something that kind of is in keeping or sort of in the same sort of spirit as what you're doing, and trying to kind of target those, because it might not be that, you know, it's not technology at all. It might be that it is more on photography, and there are people and places out there that kind of support that. So I'd say, and the same with yourself as well, talking about like, should I not be putting my stuff on Twitter? It's not. I don't think it's about like, should I not do something or do something. It's basically, how do you do it? How do you curate your promotion, and how do you curate who you go to?
I suppose what I meant more is that if hypothetically I was going to write an application and I had a really strong narrative or a story, but required technological help, is that something that your organisations are able to...
I think many different places can help with that kind of matchmaking.
Yeah.
I think what a lot of the response would be is that the web's out there. I think particularly Pegah's response is go and look for people and have some of those conversations in advance. I think if ideas are strong, then there's always a possibility to matchmake, but actually these organisations can only really do work that you yourself could do by just going and looking and finding people whose work you like.
And I think there's something else that I'm sure Anthony and others will echo this, that one of the big shifts through the space and elsewhere is the whole idea of mentoring, support. You know, if an idea is good, I mean, don't know what application process you're thinking of, but in many cases the kernel of the idea will cut through. If then it's clear that you need a certain kind of specific support or to be put in touch with someone, that will by and large now happen. But as I say, Matt's also right that there's a lot of that work that you can do for yourself.
Okay, we're going to wrap up now.
One final thing, just one tiny thing. Don't apply for lots of things.
Yeah, make them
The
instead.
hardest thing is not to apply. It's to apply for the right things and not waste your time. If you run something like this space, you get hundreds and hundreds of application things you could never fund. And so pick your battles.
Yeah. Okay, I want to wrap up by saying that the title of this session, I felt had created a kind of binary opposition about the idea that maybe putting the arts online was potentially a kind of an exercise in dumping for traditional public arts remits. And I think what's been interesting over the last hour and a half is hearing a much more nuanced and more sophisticated argument from all four of you about exactly how delivering work to audiences in new ways online and supporting artists' work is a lot more than just, saying that there's this boundary opposition between broadcast good, online, kind of a bit of a dumping ground. And actually, I just have to put in, I think that's one of the most depressing angles on the whole debate around BBC Three, that actually by going directly online to try and find audiences, the BBC has given up on young audiences. But let's not go there. Mm-hmm. So if we ended up with a more nuanced idea of actually what going online means now, if we were to come back in about 5 years, having continue to experiment and continue to find audiences, what would you be most excited about? What would you really like to see happen with the works you're doing at the moment and the projects you're doing?
Well, I think that we continue to be surprised by what we were doing all the time, that we wouldn't have formulas, that we'd be better, more sensitive to reaching audiences with more understanding, but without blinkers, actually, and that people were simply delighted, surprised, and enjoying the work, yes, in numbers, but with these subtle new KPIs that we're all talking about on this platform, which are not broadcast-driven.
Great. Alison, do you want to pick up on that?
Yeah, I think we'd end up in a place where that question wouldn't ever be asked. That question. In that the platforms weren't about a hierarchy, so you don't go, okay, I'll do it online, then it'll get on the telly, then it'll get on the stage, and actually that's all wiped away, and it's about the best work in the best place, and I think that it's always I think it can be tedious when people describe their own experience and say, and then sort of make it into a fact, but I'm going to do it anyway. So in the past year, the time that I spend with my partner and stepsons around a computer with the YouTube, as opposed to watching telly, it's now tipped to the former. Yeah. And I just think that's an interesting sign of how things go.
Anthony, very quickly.
That question's already from the past.
Yeah.
And so it will be to do with what an artistic experience feels like and what people say they've enjoyed and what they've been challenged by. And so it will be, when you talk to the artists, it's about that. It's not about which platform.
Great.
So it'll be that these conversations are about what the artists and the audiences are interested in, not the technology.
And finally, Pegah?
Yeah, I mean, the old Channel 4 motto goes something like, be the first, inspire change, and what was the third one?
Do it first, inspire change, cause trouble. Best mission statement ever.
Yeah, and I think that's something that we kind of want to do with Random Acts, but essentially it's, getting the most amount of attention. We want people's attention. We want to sort of not only inspire them, but also create a space where, we're creating impact, but not just like short, sharp bursts of impact. We want it to be sort of a steady kind of brand that only gets bigger and bigger and allows us to do more kind of experimental work. It allows us to work with even bigger and better people, but also gives us a space where we can kind of hone in the next Steve McQueen's or whatever that is.
Brilliant. That's a great place to finish. So huge thanks to everyone on the panel. Thanks, Alison. Thanks, Peter. Thanks, Anthony. And thanks, Pegah. And thank you all very much for coming along. Thanks a lot.